Hey, welcome back to Theology in the Raw with Dan White Jr. Dan, thanks for being a returning guest on Theology in the Raw.
Preston, thank you. It's good to be with you.
So for those who, I think it's been a couple of years maybe, so for those who don't know who you are, why don't you just give us a quick catch up, get us up to speed, and I want to jump into this whole post-COVID world that we're living in, because I think you're just the type of person that I think you understand the intersection between church culture and also, I don't know if you would use this phrase about yourself, but almost like a bit of a futurist, not in the weird way, but in just like, I feel like you have this ability to kind of foresee through a church lens kind of what's coming. I don't know if you would even describe yourself that way, but when I read you and listen to you, I get that sense. But who is Dan White Jr.?
Well, he's had too many cups of coffee at this point, so he's a little amped up. I've been working with I've been a pastor for 20 plus years, local church pastor and planter in mega churches, in small missional type churches, and for the last 7 years, I think it is now, I've been working with the V3 movement. And the V3 movement helps start and sustain movemental churches. And when I say movemental, I mean discipleship-centered, multiplying mid-sized communities that focus on particular issues and places in a neighborhood. And so I helped build that with J.R. Woodward, and we've been running cohorts for, I don't know, a few hundred planters have gone through that training, and so that's really my sweet spot. I love the possibilities of breaking open space for a new community in a neighborhood, and so I've been doing that. And then I've written a few books. My recent one is Love Over Fear, which is about the polarization in Christian communities around the progressive conservative divide, and you can take a look at that if you get a chance. But my recent significant shift in my life has been I moved to Puerto Rico about a year ago to start the Kineo Center, which is a place of healing for wounded and weary leaders. My wife and I have bought an old hotel and mini resort with the help of many denominational organizational partners have come around this. And it's a training ground development space for pastors who are flaming out, burning out, lashing out, hiding out because of the work of local church work. So it's a new season for me and my wife, but we're really excited. God has drawn us into this work.
Why,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, why Puerto Rico?
Well, I had a significant meltdown 4 years ago. I had a physical ailment that showed up in my body because of burnout in being a local pastor. And I came to Puerto Rico for a season as a sabbatical, and this is actually where I encountered God and some level of healing and self-awareness. And so years later, when we were considering our next shift in ministry, Puerto Rico just came back to mind because it was the ground of healing for us. And plus, it's beautiful here. It's exotic. It's beautiful. It's a mashup of cultures with those who speak English and those who don't, and speak Spanish. And it's just a beautiful space. And it's a raw space, using your language from your podcast. It's not a highly developed island, which is what I love about it. It's very beautiful. The culture is still very present. And so when we were considering a space for leaders to get away, that's where Puerto Rico kind of came into the picture. So.
And we can just, I had so many other questions I wanted to lead with, but I just so we can round this out. So leaders, do they pay? Is it funded? How long do they come for? Are you involved with their rest and pouring into them, or is it just, hey, come and hang out, and if you need me, I'm here. If not, we don't need to see each other? Give us the elevator pitch.
Yeah, we have a few different pathways for entering, but I'd say the primary path for entering into Kineo is our 24-week cohort, which launches at the end of the year. And so if you apply to be part of Kineo, you'll be partnered with 6 to 8 other leaders with a coach, and online you'll walk through this renewal process of looking at your injuries and injustices and your wounds and your ego, and then it culminates what we call the crescendo with 5 days here at the Kineo Center with a coach, with a therapist, and with my wife and I, and your cohort. That's the primary way we're addressing this problem, but we also have personal retreats and group retreats. And actually, we haven't even formally opened, and we're booked for the entire summer.
Oh, wow.
With people who are coming for a personal treat, like a hybrid vacation, but also 3 or 4 sessions with Tonya and I to work through pain and possibilities. Like, where's your acute pain in your life, and what are the possibilities of resurrection? So, and then we have group retreats that are bringing a whole team or coming with their friends and addressing the wounds in their life and the weariness that's taken over. For most of the day, they'll enjoy the pool and the beaches and the setting and have a lot of quiet time, but there will be a few sessions scattered throughout to work through that part of your life. So
now
those are really the 3 pathways.
Yeah, you said you hit the wall 4 years ago, but you left the mega church. Or so for my audience, they might remember this phrase. I got it from you. I think I've used it a few times. I think I've credited you. The church industrial complex. It's such a brilliant phrase. I still have people say that podcast of Dan White Jr., Church Industrial Complex, just captured so much of what I think a lot of pastors are in with this kind of mega church, whatever. All that to say, my question is, that was like 7 years ago when you left that. I was expecting your kind of burnout to be in the wake of that, but you said 4 years ago. What can you unpack a little bit what happened 4 years ago?
Certainly. Sure. So I just for kind of timeline's sake, I left that mega church. I had a significant pivot and shift and deconstruction around ecclesiology 11 years ago. So that mega church departure was 11 years ago. And then I planted a missional church that multiplied, and my inner life had a significant burnout 4 years ago. So I was about 8 years into that plant and started to, what happened was I was diagnosed with CTSD, which is cumulative traumatic stress disorder. Wow. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a professional. It was a shocking, to hear that from my physician and a neurologist. And the reason it was discovered was because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. And we thought it was Parkinson's for a little while, but my hands just tremored. And it was because I was really responding to the stresses and rejection and abandonment and betrayal and loss that local pastors typically stuff under the carpet in their lives, and it was coming out of my body. And so 4 years ago, that was the first time I started to pay attention to how hurt and sad and lonely I was. And it still took me 2 years to feel like I had the freedom to step down from leading our church. I was in denial, actually. I was fighting and resisting letting go. And it took my wife's prophetic voice to say, you can't do this any longer. You're going to kill yourself. So, so that's the journey. I've had 2 significant places. I don't know if this is normal, for leaders to go. It seems like every 10 years, God wants to do a deeper work in my life and disrupts something I'm attached to. So partly because my identity is attached to it. So that's what occurred a few years ago.
For those who are kind of teetering on burnout, and I've had a few in my season. One was a year ago, which led to the first sabbatical I've taken in 20 years.
Yes.
20 years of ministry. I mean, before that was nonstop school. And I'm just like, man, I could see healthiness and taking a sabbatical like every 2 or 3 years, which is probably
Sure.
there's a Southern Baptist Seminary. I think it's I think the professors like every 3 years get a sabbatical, every 6 years get a full year off or something like that. Now it's a writing,
wow.
like they're supposed to be writing and stuff. But
Sure.
at first I was like, man, that seems like a lot. But I'm like,
Yeah.
that might be a healthy pace. But what for those who are maybe teetering on burnout, and you don't have to be a pastor, you could be just in life.
No.
What
Right.
what are what are your recommendations? I mean, is it just basically take time off, or how do you cultivate? I guess there's kind of two questions. One, how do you recognize
Yeah.
it, and then two, how do you cultivate healthy rhythms that prevent it from happening again and again and again?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, that's a pretty that's a deep dive to really unpack all of that. But I do think that just resting is not enough to address burnout. That's a part of it. The interesting part is that in my own story, I had a pretty strong rhythm of Sabbath and rest in my ministry life, and it was the unaddressed hurts, and it's that underworld in your life that goes unaddressed. You accumulate over a period of time anger and bitterness and loss, and for me. How I knew I was burning out was that first I had that physical ailment, but I started to hide out. I started to retreat from people and detach. I don't know if you're into the Enneagram, but as an Enneagram 5, that's how I deal with not being able to face reality. Is I start to disappear, and for other people, they lash out and they start having anger issues and bullying, and for others. They just indulge in entertainment, and so burnout shows itself differently in our personalities. It's all ways of coping with burnout. Is really I just can't carry on. I'm too exhausted, but we don't know why. We just know we're tired, and so we find different ways of coping with that. So I would suggest anybody that's feeling. It's funny. Really wanted to talk about exhaustion post-COVID, but a little later is when we're sensing we're exhausted. It's really a signpost or a signal that there's unaddressed hurt and loss and grief in your life that hasn't really been unpacked.
Okay.
It could be people that you've lost. It could be the loss of a dream. It could be the grief of something that you thought you were going to be that you're not. And so it's really important to rest, but it's also really important to do that deeper work of unraveling that so that you're not just jumping back in with the same underlying issues that you started taking the rest for.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, it's awesome that you can see, like, well, what I'm trying to say, that you're able to kind of self-analyze and pursue and be willing to get the help that you need. Because I think a lot of people, right, they just don't either recognize it, or even if they do, they don't address it. They don't know how to address it. They don't want to address it. That's probably the majority.
Yes.
I would think they're probably just slugging through life, carrying all this with them. And man, I bet you probably have tons of stories. I mean, just through Kineo now. I mean, probably a lot of versions of you that you're seeing come in. You know.
So true.
Yeah.
I mean, burnout is happening across the board. It's happening with pastors and planters as well as congregants. There's an existential exhaustion that we're collectively experiencing, but we don't know why. So like I have conversations with megachurch pastors. I have conversations with small church pastors. I have congregations with people who've just served in the church, and everybody is saying the same thing behind closed doors. They're tired. They're weary. They don't know if they want to keep applying energy to whatever's in front of them. And so I think COVID is revealing some of that. So
Well, that's a good segue to the COVID. I was going to ask the question, and this is related, I think, but how much of that's due to social media or the internet? Like, I think of my life pre-internet, or at least tied to the internet. Not, obviously it's been around for a while. But even like back in, I think of like, let's see, my seminary PhD days. So we're talking like 2000 to 2007. Okay, so the internet's around.
Yes.
Email's around, but it's, social media is not really around yet. And I just felt like I'd wake up. I would, like, during my studies, I would just study. I could focus, like, I would be in a book for like 4 hours and wouldn't look up. I'd be like typing, taking notes, doing research, and then take a quick break for lunch, go back, and da-da-da. There's no, I don't know, it just seemed different.
Yeah.
I just wonder... There obviously the profound distractedness of having your phone and internet, but even the stress, and I think this is where COVID, or all of 2020 between politics and the race stuff flaring up and COVID, just waking up every morning and wondering if the world is still here, just that stress, and then another riot breaks out, and this, and another shooting, and all of that, you're just well, I guess that's a question, really. Are we absorbing so much more through the internet that we just didn't before? Like, if you just live an embodied local life and fight the injustices in your neighborhood and your city and pay attention to your neighbors and your community, and you're not absorbing all of this stuff out there. I don't know. Is that? Do you think that's causing as part of the massive stress?
Yeah, I mean, Sherry, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Sherry Turkle's work.
I have not read it. It's been on my book list. Yeah.
Oh, so good. Yeah, her Alone Together and her recent book, Reclaiming Conversation. She does a lot of work around neurology and the psychology of how technology is depleting us and rewiring our brains. And part of it is because our brains are not conditioned to constantly be captivated by stimulants, constantly having to have our attention grabbed. And there's no rest in our brain. We're not able to relax. We're not able to not have our attention grabbed. And so 24/7 news, Twitter, Facebook is constantly fighting for our attention, and we're submitting to it. We're giving it away. And so we're unable to actually recover, specifically in our prefrontal cortex, a sense of contentment or centering. It's buzzing all the time. And so that's exhausting, just on a real blue collar level, to just constantly be someone appealing to your attention. Look at me, see this, there's a problem in the world. You're not doing enough about it. Can you believe so-and-so said this online today? You need to chime in about it. I mean, it's just all day long. And so we're more connected to our kind of a global world than our local world. And I think that's also creating some sense of destabilization in our character and how we feel. We're not really living in our bodies. We're living more in this kind of cyber technological embodied place. So Sherry Turkle's work really addresses that. One of the things that she brought out, which I thought was probably the most illuminating piece, is that with 3+ hours online a day for an adult, not just for kids, this thing called cocooning happens. Cocooning, she called it. And it's showing that cocooning is this closing down of our prefrontal cortex, like a darkening or a tunnel. And this is what creates depression and anxiety. And cocooning happens is when they observe people's brains that have taken their own life, their brains had cocooned, where they have no sense of reality and everything closes in. If you can think about being in a cocoon, it closes in on you. And she's saying that the internet is actually changing our brains for more cocooning. And so I think that we're going to have just a harvest of depression and and people unable to kind of find reality and stabilization because of how much we're consuming online. And and I am online, so this is not just I'm not acting. I'm trying not to act Amish here and just say get rid of everything. But I don't think that we have a good handle on the information age and how much consumption is affecting our ability to find peace and rest and recover. We don't have any recovery time. So, do
you feel like that seems like such a pervasive and profound problem? Do you feel like it's being addressed by the church as aggressively or urgently as it should? Because if you think about what you said, if you are online for 3 hours a day, the adult average, and probably most of us, if we're honest, are like, it's probably more than that. Sure. You're like that. If your brain is cocooning, so I'm just brand new concept here.
Sure.
But that's like, if your prefrontal cortex isn't functioning well, that's kind of a big deal. Like, you can't do anything.
Yeah.
as a Homo sapien. So like, it seems like if this is a problem way more severe than like COVID or something, or where lots of people are being affected. Well, this is like everybody besides the Amish are going to be negatively impacted by this on some level, perhaps even profoundly negatively impacted. Severe depression, suicidality, or even just I don't know, indifference, apathy, and sometimes I feel that, like where it's not to me, I'm not bent towards depression enough, but just that kind of just exhausted mentally, and not because I studied all day, although that might be added to it, but it was just like, man, when I get to watch Netflix tonight, because I'm just kind of spent, I'm with you. I don't know.
Preston, I think this is the sticky part. Is I think that the church has built some kind of like symbiotic relationship with technology or with any medium that's going to deliver content or information. And so to help disciple people out of just constant consumption would actually shoot the church in the foot in a way. So this is what happened during COVID. Preston, was when COVID hit, we saw so many churches pivot towards creating as much content as they could to deliver to their congregants. Mm-hmm. More sermons, more midweek pep talks, more produced worship services. I talked to a small church pastor, has one staff and a laptop, to a mega church that has a production team. And they all pivoted towards just having to create as much content as possible to get people through this hard time. Mm. And that is revealing kind of, I think, a broken relationship we have between the church and congregants. There's this provider-consumer dynamic relationship that has taken over, and that's why that was our answer for COVID. For many, I know there's exceptions, but for most, that was how we pivoted. If we can get more content, more information to people, they'll be able to get through COVID. And we're exhausted from it. It did not feed us. It actually depleted us. And pastors are they've burnt themselves out over this last year. I can't tell you how many leaders I've talked to who are just like, as soon as this COVID thing is completely over, I'm out, because they just became service providers. And congregants have, we're starting to see stats that 30 to 50% of people are not going to come back to their church and are not coming back. And even though they were given so much to consume, they did not feel attached to their local church. And so to critique technology and to start to discern how technology is shaping us for a disembodied life, how to start having some kind of tension and resistance around how much we consume, actually doesn't work in the favor of the modern church, because that's how the modern church thinks it is. I think they think that's their bread and butter. And I completely understand this part as a leader and as a pastor, because I did this for 25 years. If I don't produce good stuff weekly, sermons, worship, Bible studies, nobody is going to come. Nobody's going to like me. Nobody's going to stay and stick. Nobody's going to join me. That was working in my subconscious all the time. And if you think about that dynamic, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to live in that mentality. And I think it's unrewarding for people who want to be part of the church, for that to be the primary way they relate. And that's why I think COVID has lifted the lid. It's showing us that we're more transactional in our relationships than we were covenantal. We were more fans than family. And I think it's the medium, the way that we have tried to relate with one another is primarily through content delivery and then content consumption. No critique on your podcast, because, that's a content delivery. But yeah. I just know so many pastors right now who are turning all their sermons into podcasts. And no wonder we're whipped.
What do you, let's go back to that.
So tired.
That's it. If a pastor's listening and thinking like, yeah, it's exactly what we did, but what could we have done differently? Like, what if you were going to coach people through that? Or you did coach people? Like, what instead of just delivering more content or the same content or more sermons or more whatever? Like, what could they have done during COVID?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to say this gently without, throwing everyone under the bus. So, I was honestly disappointed that was the first pivot, was to create more content rather than galvanizing people to teach themselves, to care for each other. I don't think we have the muscle. There's a lot of atrophy around believing that Christians can teach each other. That they can helping them gather together rather than helping them come to us for gathering or come to us for correct teaching and doctrine. So there are some exceptions. Again, there were some churches that pivoted towards, okay, let's release the priesthood of believers here and move out of the way. I think that's where the shift should have been. And this is what you see, this is where you see any place the church is highly persecuted. It has to pivot towards the priesthood of believers out of necessity, which is good. And because the professional clergy gets either arrested or killed. I was hoping that the pandemic would have revealed that the priests aren't as necessary for our walk in Christ. We have what we need for life and godliness together. And so helping to train and galvanize people in smaller communities, I think would have been now some did do that. I think there is some awakening around that, because I'm just now starting to have those conversations with megachurch pastors who are starting to evaluate, the habit they've been building of just creating so much content and trying to get everybody to come back to the building. Did we miss something here? So I think that's what should have happened. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. I still maybe a bit more on what does that practically look like. So it's COVID's hit, nobody's showing up. It's Sunday morning. What should the pastor be doing to facilitate that? Like, there still is a pastor who's doing, like, he's not sleeping in or saying, all right, I'm done. You guys just get it from, like, what is he doing is 50 hours a week during COVID,
I hear you. Yeah. Well, I did write a whole book about this. So in the church, the book, The Church's Movement, which is a really practical kind of guide to this way of being the church. But ultimately, if I can just simplify, is the pastor, the pastoral role, or even ministry leaders' hover around the Communication Act on Sunday. That's like the primary gravitational pull, is the act of preaching, and even worship has become a communication act. Like, come see what we've put together. I think that pastors and ministry leaders need to deconstruct that dynamic, because I think it's exhausting. I don't think it's all that faithful to the first early DNA of the Jesus movement. And I also think that congregants, this is what we're seeing, I think congregants are detaching from that because it's actually not bonding. It's a very transactional relationship. So pivoting from that to a discipler who is helping, or a community organizer to help the church gather in small ways, in small places, for mutual edification, liturgical formation, local mission. So a pastor, rather than provider, is one of coach and discipler, so that they can release a decentralized movement. Everything right now, even, and I don't always want to critique the modern megachurch, because it's both in the liturgical mainline church and in megachurch. Both of them have a come and see approach to whether you're participating in a liturgy or participating in modern worship and preaching. There's still we have something here, come and partake. That's a very consumptive relating, and I think that's wreaking havoc right now with why people aren't coming back to both of those spaces. Consumption, just to kind of define what I'm going to keep using this language, consumerism is the primary posture that people in places and things exist for my good, and I am the judge about their quality, and based upon that judgment of whether it's quality, I will commit. And so it's this succession of how I relate with people, places, and things. I'm the judge of its quality. Do I like this? Do I not like this? Is this good for me? Is this not good for me? Does this reach my standards? Do I like this style? Do I like this culture? And if I do, then I'll commit. If I don't, then I won't commit. And the moment that I don't like something in that environment, my commitment wanes. I mean, think about it. That's how we relate with TV shows and restaurants and Amazon and products and clothing. I mean, all day long, that's the way that we are relating with everything. So it's really hard to turn this off when we're talking about the local church, because that's the way we're relating with the local church, as primarily in a consumptive posture. So pastors need to break that codependent relationship. And honestly, as a pastor, I like that relationship. Because I like to produce content, and I like I like the sound of my own voice and my own sermons, and so so when someone wants to download my sermon, or back then it was actually buy the CDs, I got an emotional release. It felt good, and so when people say they loved worship that Sunday, there's an emotional return on that. So I think that it's actually a codependent relationship that needs to be broken around galvanizing people for their own care and mission and development.
So do you think that's
go ahead.
That's a bit of maybe a blind spot, like recognizing the profound consumerism that the consumeristic society that we're living in, the negative effects of that, and then being able to analyze our own church structures and rhythms to see how much of our church rhythms are basically feeding into that kind of transactional consumer kind of mentality, and how that could potentially interrupt or stifle one's discipleship journey. I mean, would that be something, a takeaway, again, a leader listening to this, like, or even a parent or anybody who's in a disciple-ish kind of relationship, to help people to recognize what aspects of their faith, their church rhythms are really mirroring our consumeristic society, which hopefully we should recognize some problems with that. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I tend to think that this is just where I'm coming from. I think consumerism is the greatest idol
in the West. I think it is the thing that we bow down to and we worship. I think it's our biggest export around the world. Any society that people want to come to the U.S. because of the consumerism that is here. And so the church is to be, in Stanley Hauerwas's words, a countercultural prophetic community. Mm-hmm. And I would start to planting a church or being the church here in the West, I would say, what's the biggest idol that we're all bowing down to? And how is the church baptizing that idol in the way that we're being the church? This is a tension-filled work. It's not an either or. It's a both and so we're never going to get away completely from just partaking and receiving. Mm-hmm. But I do think that the church has been quite, leadership 101 and church growth 101 and even in, I'll just say this, even in the ancient future movement, which is about recovering liturgy, and I went through that 15 years ago, we did have this MO that if we just created a really moving liturgical experience, people are going to want to come to church. And even that is a consumptive approach and a very kind of spectatoritis way of designing the church. So I think we need to interrogate how this is filtered into the way we follow Jesus, the way we relate with the church. I don't think we need to be afraid of what it reveals. Just to kind of just go back to something real quick is it's already revealing, and this is what COVID has revealed. People related with their church, a good portion, more stats are coming up, but more people related with their church. I just was talking to a couple here at our retreat center, a married couple, and they said this. They said, we've been attending our church for 10 years, and COVID revealed to us how little attachment we actually had to our church.
Yeah.
I think that's what COVID is revealing for people, is that they have been fans consuming everything that they liked about their church, but COVID broke something there and exhausted us, and now we're reevaluating, do I really feel all that attached to the church? So it's already being revealed. I think consumerism is already so we either, here's the thing, we either break this attachment because it's going to break the backs of pastors, priests, and planters, or people are going to continue to break away from the church, even though they still want to follow Jesus. Yeah. I think that this is my kind of summary of this situation, is that 500 years ago the Reformation was about a reformation of beliefs. I think right now the rumblings that we're just starting to feel, some people think they've been feeling for a long time, but I think COVID is bringing them into the clear, but that there's a new reformation. I think it's a reformation of ecclesiology, how we gather. That wasn't addressed in the last Reformation. It wasn't addressed in Christendom. Christendom, it all stayed intact except the beliefs changed. And so I think we're at that place right now that we need to, we need a new reformation of how we come together.
Can you
advise the idols of consumerism and this? Go ahead.
Well, you mentioned something, and you're kind of coming back to it now, that people, I forget the percentage, 30-40% of people aren't coming back post-COVID. Coming back as in coming back and attending a church service. And I wanted to ask, why is that? But I think you might be answering that now. Is the why that not having gone to a church service for a year, they've looked and maybe haven't missed, like they're like, I don't feel like I've missed much. Yeah. I can, if it's just coming to receive a sermon and watch, like engage in worship, maybe I've been able to do that online. Or maybe I didn't do it online, but I went fishing and I kind of had a good day, and I don't feel like a major void in my life that I didn't get to go to a church service, 3 or 4 times a month. I'm trying to, is that what part of the issue? Is there more to it than that, or?
Well, I think that there's I think there's two things going on. I think that COVID has revealed that we don't really miss those goods and services. We can get them other places. When I say goods and services, everything that the church provided for us, we can find somewhere else. At our own convenience, on our own timing, laying on our bed or couch. And I think the church kind of revealed that we don't miss it that much. I mean, I'm speaking obviously anecdotally here, but everyone I talk to is evaluating how much they really valued that dynamic, and I think COVID has put a light on that. I think the second piece is back to, I think we're exhausted. I think there's an existential exhaustion settling in. It reminds me of this. Years ago, I had this job that was like 75 minutes away from my house, and I really wanted the job. I was so excited about the job, and so I was willing to make that drive. But I had to get up at 5 a.m. every morning to make it. And then when I came home, the drive was even longer because of bumper-to-bumper traffic. Preston, I mean, within 4 months, I started to ask the question, do I really want this job? I'm so tired. I hate the drive. I come home, my nerves are shot from... And I eventually realized I didn't want the job that bad. Something I was so excited about that I thought was just the pinnacle of arrival for me really wasn't worth it because of the toll it took on me. And I think that's what's happening with exhaustion. That's what exhaustion does to you. You start to evaluate, do I really want to work this hard for Christian community? Do I really want to work this hard to be fed spiritually? Do I really want to work this hard to show up and go through the motions on Sunday? You might have been excited about it at one point and really excited about the prospects, but I do think it's making people evaluate whether it's worth the energy. And so I think that's what's going on.
I know it's kind of cliched now. It might be revolutionary in some circles, but it seems to me that when I look at my own soul, when I talk to people, when I just look at what I think people are looking for, it is this profound sense of belonging, right? I mean, whatever that looks like, whether it's a smaller setting and you're engaged in authentic relationships, or maybe a larger setting, but you have some kind of, like, you feel like you come, when you gather, whatever that looks like, you're like, man, I am a piece of this, and if I'm not here, this thing does not look the same. And if that person's not there, there's a sadness, like the whole puzzle is not there. There's a missing piece. It's a family gathering where your favorite uncle couldn't make it, and you're like, oh, this isn't the same. And then he shows up out of nowhere. Hey, I made it back early, and everybody's so excited because he's there. Like, it's the I just turn a very different direction. It's no, this is good. One of the really discouraging thing, I think, for Christians when they have a heart for like the LGBT community, it's like, oh, I want to reach the LGBT community. I'm like, well, what kind of community do you foresee them stepping into? Because they're stepping out. You're asking them to step out of a pretty tight knit community, and I know it's got its own issues or whatever, but like, what are they stepping into? Or even, I think Francis Chan shared a story about, a gang member getting saved, and when he's in the gang, it's like his mother's taken care of, his kids are taken care of. If he needs anything at 4 a.m, seconds away, people are like, it's just that tight knit. And he gets saved, and he shows up to church. He's so excited. Now this is my new kind of gang, and he's like, oh, yes. Wait a minute. I just left the most like family, like true community, like a piece of me was embedded into this community. I don't know. For me, I this is purely anecdotal now.
That's good.
Like, for me, that if I can't. I've had I've shared this publicly many times. Really hard time just landing at a church. Had a really hard time just finding a church. People are like, what are you looking for? There's no perfect church. And I'm like, well, I don't think I'm looking for a perfect church. I want the sense of I belong here. And if I'm not here, I'm missed, and people recognize that. And when other people are here, I recognize that. And I don't think that's not a perfect church at all. I just want that profound sense of belonging. Is that oversimplified? Is that, is there more to it than that? Is that, I don't know. I feel like in my circles, we talk about belonging a lot. So I feel like I'm kicking a dead horse, but
sure.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think that belonging is at the center of the early magnetism of the Jesus movement, of the early church. In contrast, at that point, you had the Jewish synagogue, and then you had Greek mystery cults who were all around rituals, and you had to do this to participate. And then you have this Jesus community that stripped all of that away. I like to call it minimalism. They embraced a minimalism, and minimalism, actually, that term is only about 40 years old now, but minimalism was a movement in art and in music to kind of simplify and pare things down in order to make space for the most beautiful things. And the church at this point has just embraced excess and so much ritual and so many cultural idiosyncrasies that there's not enough. We haven't made space for the potent centering of belonging to each other in Christ. And I know that every pastor would say, no, that's what we're about. We're about belonging in community. But you can't say that and still pad everything with resources. You can't say you're practicing minimalism in art and just glut up the canvas with everything you've got. And something's got to go. Something has to give to make space for belonging and tethering to one another. And I think that hasn't happened, and that's why people's relationship with the church is more fan than family, is because belonging wasn't the primary attachment. I'm hoping that community kind of moves out of being a fad or a buzzword we put on our mission statements and starts to make us pare down and embrace, a missional minimalism, a simplicity, so that our life together, using Bonhoeffer's language, under the leadership of Christ in the world, becomes like the primary beauty. That's all we need. That's all we need to be together. So when we have discussions on race or discussions on pandemic stuff, I don't split and leave you that quickly because I'm more family than fan, right? And this is what's happened because of the political stuff that's happening so much. We're not loyal to one another in those conversations because we're choosing affinity over family. And so I think the foundations are really, really thin for belonging. I don't know if that's no. So I'm with you, Preston, on that.
What are some things a church can do? Let's just pick a fictitious church, like a 500 size, maybe 2 services. Sure. Just your kind of bigger than average, but not mega church. Sure. Just to acknowledge as you've done, and I think when we're kind of unpacking and analyzing and critiquing ecclesiological structures, I just want to acknowledge, most pastors that I know at least are like, dude, 100%, but I got a sermon to prepare, I got 2 people to bury next week, a marriage that's blew up, and I don't know if we're going to make budget because our biggest giver just left because I preached on race and he didn't like what and this is all I've known. And so I don't even have time or space to kind of reimagine what my ecclesiology is going to look like when it could potentially just destroy the church and I've got to fire 4 people or So I acknowledging that I think the heart of most pastors is I want to see people grow. I want to see them belong. I want to see them, even if I want to see them come to church, not just because it's a good worship service, but because they are engaging people. So what are some, again, real practical things that you would recommend, maybe not mandate, but say, hey, here's some ideas for a church that is in that kind of rhythm of doing what they've done for 25 years, but are willing to like say, hey, all right, what are some things we could do differently, just practically, to help people cultivate a more genuine discipleship and sense of belonging?
Yeah.
I hope I worded all that right. Yeah.
That's good. I'm picking up what you're putting down. I come at this with a little bit of trembling because I was and am that pastor who felt like I'm doing everything that I can do. And now you're just asking me to do more.
Yeah.
And that can feel like shame and guilt, right? I think that there's two approaches to this. There's the approach of like burning it all down and just saying, we're canceling this, we're canceling that, we're done with this, we're done with that. This is the new structure. And I know that some pastors, they're so fed up. And in their prophetic desire to see God do something new, that's what they want to do. They just want to burn it all up. I think that would be a mistake. I think the best place to start. First, read my book, Church as Movement.
Say it again. Church as Movement. Church as Movement.
Yeah, Church as Movement. Yeah. I'm sorry about the self-promotion.
Dude,
there.
No.
But
I'm a huge fan of putting good resources in front of people. So no, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, the book was written for this very purpose. I mean, but the best place to start actually is to start the way Jesus started and to start small. Jesus could have arrived at a Greek Colosseum and announced his divinity and said the kingdom of God is at hand and created an unbelievable, undeniable moment that something supernatural is happening. And instead of doing that, he just chose a small ragamuffin crew of disciples to take on mission, live into community with each other, and then teach them how to commune with the Father. So any pastors who's feeling this, I would say, why don't we just start a small discipleship band of people in a local neighborhood, 5 to 8 people, and orient around communion with God, community with each other, and commission into our neighborhood. And do that out on the edge as a renewing work. Do that out on the edge of the empire, out on the edge of our programs. Don't promote it. Don't preach it from the pulpit. Don't put it on a pamphlet in a program. You don't have to put it on your website. You need to practice this. We need to embody this. We need to work. We need to experience the bumps and bruises of living with other people on mission with minimalism, without needing an excessive resources to do it. That's where I would start. I think that's probably the most prolific and renewing force to the larger church is when we have prototypes. Everybody's talking about it. Very few people are doing it. And this is what we need, people to see a living prototype of this smallness that is actually sharing the way of Jesus in a local space. So I don't know if that helps.
No, it does. And I like your emphasis on not overnight changes or just drastic things, that this could be a very slow kind of process. I mean, quick changes usually last quickly.
Yes.
But I just, as you're talking, I was thinking, what if, just thinking out loud. So, what if a pastor got his elders, or maybe they're not even officially elders, but just a few leaders together, 5, 8, 10, and just shared his heart, saying, hey, look, I know we're doing this church industrial complex thing and all this stuff, but I just really want to, we're living in this post-COVID world. The internet's been around for a while. There's all kinds of just new issues presenting us, and yet we're using the same ecclesiological structures we did before the internet was invented. I want to, can we spend a year? We're going to get together, read some books, pray, talk, discuss, and just kind of just slowly, I just need to start thinking out loud about what this church could look like in the near future in a way that's going to
Yes.
better deepen discipleship.
Yes.
I don't know, like that. And I've
That's
often
good.
been, I don't, this,
Yeah.
so I feel like so much, I don't know, again, thinking out loud, a lot of what is stifling people's discipleship, it does have to do with cultural issues. Let me just throw a few out. Sexuality, gender, politics,
Yes.
race,
Yes.
social media. Is there anybody who would say no, nope, my discipleship basically is unrelated to any of those issues? Like probably a small, and yet,
You're right.
I don't know, like could churches have more open forums and discussions
Yes.
about these issues and help
Yes.
people engage? Not just a sermon, not against a monological sermon
Yeah.
on sexuality. I've done them. I continue to do them. But
Sure.
what if you had an ongoing Sunday evening 2-hour where people can like ask questions and it's a
Yeah.
help people engage these really
Yes.
tough issues that at the end of the day they might have questions about the ending of Mark 16 and whether it was in the original manuscript, or they might really want to know,
Yes.
be confident that Paul wrote 1 Timothy, and there might be
Yes.
some traditional issues, that, but I think that there's,
Yes.
I don't know, in the age of the internet, it's a lot of these cultural things that do seem to be at the front and center of people's minds when they wake up every morning. I don't know. And this is the world I
Yeah.
live in, so I don't want to project my world on everybody else, but
No,
like,
that's good.
I don't know.
I do think there's not enough space. Well, partly what we're facing is like the tyranny of speed that the church feels to become relevant and to produce. That eliminates space for conversation. And so when most churches approach discipleship, they approach it as a microwave rather than a slow cooker.
Yeah, that's good.
They want to put together a free class on sexuality, and when everything's done, boom, everybody's on the same page, or at least they know where the church stands. We need to develop these slow, long development process where learning, reflection is unhurried and is safe. And so most people have so many questions about what's happening politically and with sociologically and with sexuality, but there's not enough space to talk about it, and it's not very safe to talk about it at church because you either get on board with the class or you don't take the class. And so I think that a church that wanted to develop people would mark out like a slow cook discipleship space. And when I say discipleship, it's not just one way. It was highly midrash, interactive. And so that is that's a divine experiment to give people space to explore with the guidance of careful shepherds.
That's good. And even helping people to live unhurried lives, right? Because that's a great point you brought up. I mean, if people are living unhealthy, hurried lives, then to say, hey, we're going to open up this class on Wednesday evening or whatever, like, dude, I don't got space for that. It sounds great. I would love to, but I just can't. Yeah. And this is my own. I've got 4 teenagers right now. We are in the thick of potentially living that kind of life. We try I would say pretty well to war against the kind of American dream and rhythm and sports every second of every day and all that. But it's still very, even for someone who's somewhat aware of that, it's still very, it's tough. So helping disciple people into the ruthless elimination of hurry, to quote a mutual friend's book.
Yes, that's good. Love it.
I don't know.
Preston, anytime you offer these possible ways for the church to begin a corrective or, to embrace whatever God's doing, they just add it into the mix of what they're already doing. And, if you're going to start something, you got to stop something. So
that's good.
You're going to have to clear out space for this. It can't just be added on to your small group ministry, your Sunday school in the morning, sermons. Something's got to go in order to make, this is again minimalism. You've got to create space for something to breathe. So, yeah, so I wouldn't want a pastor to hear this and be like, oh man, I got to start another Friday night meeting. Because in some sense, your medium is your message. So now you're just endorsing the same problem that you're teaching against, right? It's like,
yeah, totally.
So
I just had a great conversation with a couple of pastor friends of mine. Well, they don't care if it'll shout out to Evan Wickham and Matt Larson down in Southern California. And they both were expressing this. So my buddy Matt, he church planter, planted a church over 10 years ago, and now it's established church. They've reproduced probably a total of, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 churches that like they reproduce a church, and that church reproduces, and it's fantastic. And his dad is like a retired pastor, but doesn't believe in retirement from ministry. So the dude like travels the world teaching pastors in remote areas, and then also when he's not traveling, doing like kind of like teaching overseas, he's like just pouring into guys, and he's like pouring into like 10 or 15 guys, I'm like, man, how okay, he's a retired pastor, he's got all this knowledge and wisdom, and like that's golden, but that's pretty unique. But what would it look like? This is more my buddy Matt sharing his heart. Like, how can we help empower the older people to pour into the youngers, Sure. And this is where Evan's got a really young church. He's like, man, I would give anything to have a few seasoned just Christians who are intentional with just walking one-on-one or 1-on-3 or 1-on-5 or something. And I know this is there's nothing new in what I'm saying here, but I mean, I don't know if that was more of a higher priority. Like, how can church leaders really empower, equip the priesthood of all believers, which you brought up earlier, like, but more specifically the older pouring into the younger, more mature pouring into the less mature. I don't know, that, I'm sure it's happening, but
well, it's certainly happening, but I think it's become secondary and peripheral to most churches. So to me, it's about a reemphasis and a decluttering in order to make space for that discipleship relationship. And that's this. And this is not because it's a sexy fad or because this is where the publishing industry is, right? This is how Jesus did it. And so Jesus had the ability to create a mass movement, and he was given that temptation by Satan multiple times, 3 times in the desert. We can fast track this thing. And Jesus resisted that for something super small, a seedling of discipleship. And so the church has to come to terms with that. I think that's the center of the gospel, is not just the truth of God's grace, but also the way God embodied bringing about the kingdom of God. So that's also part of the gospel. It's not just a message. It's also the mode that we operate in. So I think that has to be brought back into the center of the room. And if I know the fear, Preston. I know that the guttural instinct is, if we do that, nobody's going to want to come.
Do you think that's a I was going to bring this up earlier. I'm glad you brought it back up. Do you think that is a driving motivation to bring and keep people? And do you think that creates a lot of unhealthy ecclesiological patterns?
Totally. I think fear is at the center of our decisions around ecclesiology. Fear about being irrelevant, fear about numbers, fear about what will you said earlier, what am I going to do with my job as a pastor? I think fear is at the center of why we can't have this conversation. So, yeah.
Which I get. I mean, I get, if I knew that I was going to make a ministry decision that could have major financial ramifications on me, my family, my career, whatever like that, I could, as much as I'm like, no, do the right thing. When it's you,
totally.
What I love about you, Dan, is you're not speaking theoretically. You've been there, done that. This ain't your first rodeo. You've been in various different ministry contexts and have made tough decisions that have had ramifications. But So yeah, I get that. I just wonder.
Yeah.
I just wonder though, like, I just wonder if there is a simmering hunger for the very kinds of things that we're talking about. That I mean, it depends on the congregation, but I just wonder if you would actually end up, ironically, if you cared less about drawing people, you might end up drawing more people. I'll never forget church here in town. I think they got this the whole Serve Sunday thing. I think Brandon Hatmaker first started doing that. You know, every 6 weeks or every 4 weeks, there's no church service. They just go out and serve in the community. Like that's, and we're not canceling church. We're being the church. We're not, and a buddy of mine started doing that here in town, and he would always be shocked he's like, that was always our biggest turnout. Every 6 weeks, we don't do a church service. We go out and serve, and there's more unbelievers that show up. So like, go serve a needy person, go help Muslims or whatever in this neighborhood. Like, I'm all about that. It's always the biggest attendance, and usually the most non-believers would show up. So, because you would think like, gosh, if I cancel church service, like people are gonna be so upset. No one's gonna show up. People are gonna start not coming when we do have church service. And I don't know. I just wonder if you started doing things that were a little more outside the box, unpredictable, authentic, and fostering belonging, you might actually.
Yes.
But that still can't be your motivation. Like, I'm going to be raw and different because so that I get an audience, or I don't know.
Yeah. I do think, Preston, this is what I think, back to our kind of original thing we were geeking out on earlier, was I think COVID has revealed or maybe tuned us in to a deeper hunger, like a tectonic groaning, that we and this, you get a pastor or a planter in a space, behind a closed door, and they can be honest, they're often hungry for something different.
Yeah.
They're a bit tired. They're exhausted, and more than a bit tired. I mean, that's why the Kineo Center was started, because we're exhausted. We're exhausted from the rat race and kind of this tyranny of the industrial complex. But I think the hunger is there, and I think we're becoming more attuned to that hunger. I think that the next precipice is to address the fear of letting go. You can't experience resurrection. You can't experience renewal. And I know this on a personal level. Anything new God wanted to birth in my life required kenosis, required some kind of self-emptying. There was something I was attached to, that I was glued to, that I thought was a part of my identity vocationally, was part of my security financially, was a part of my relational God said, you have got to let go if you want me to do a new work in your soul. And so I think that's the same, on a church structural system, ecclesiological level.
Yeah.
Something's got to die in order for new life to make way. So,
man, that's a good word. Well, dude, we should wrap this up, man. There's so, I just looked at the time and I'm like, man, there's so many. We could just keep talking for hours, but let's let people simmer and digest some of the convoluted open air thoughts that you and I have been bantering around. But I just to repeat what I just said earlier, what I love about you, Dan, is see, a lot of things I'd say when it comes to like church are really theoretical. I mean, I've been in church my whole life. I've been a leader, but I haven't been like a full-time pastor for a number of years and done it. So when I say, hey, we should do this, we should do that, you maybe try this, it's like, well, yeah, it's nice for you to sit in your basement on your podcast and throw out these ideas and then go, you don't have to reap the. So, and I totally get that. But what I love is I don't think I'm totally crazy, because you and I think are on very similar pages, and yet you've been in the grind for so long and have coached other pastors. So anyway, I think you bring a level of authority and legitimacy to your ideas, because you're speaking out of experience. So so thank you, Dan, for being alive, for existing, and for coming on the show. Thank
you. That I'll carry that with me today. I appreciate that.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple books, so Church as Movement, and then Love Over Fear, and have you written a couple others, or I'm blanking on?
I wrote a book called I wrote a book called Subterranean almost 10 years ago, and
that's right.
I've got a little ebook out called Dialogical Preaching, which is how to include dialogue in your preaching. So
cool.
I got a lot of stuff floating out there.
And where can people find you? You have your website, Dan White Jr.?
Yep, the danwhitejr.com. And my primary planting work is with the V3 movement. A great collection of men and women who are doing really cool things in the neighborhood. And then the Kineo Center, KINEO Center.com, which is a recent and new work for my wife and I and a team around healing and renewal for wounded and weary leaders. So if that's you, maybe that's a good space to start.
Yeah, maybe you'll see me soon.
I'd love to have you, Preston. We'd love to host you.
Hey, Dan, thanks so much for being on. Appreciate it. Take care.
Yes, peace, friend.